If you swipe away now, you might lose the next decade of your life to a quiet collapse. One that looks exactly like success. Look at Marcus, 45 years old, the reliable provider, the man who handles every crisis. But right now, at 3 a.m, he is sitting on the edge of his bed, completely paralyzed. His body is healthy, but his nervous system is initiating a brutal hostage negotiation. If you have ever felt this crushing exhaustion, the kind no vacation can cure, you're not broken. Today, we will dissect the anatomy of the high-functioning midlife burnout. You will discover why your late-night scrolling is actually a desperate biological SOS. We will unearth how the childhood trap of being the good guy hardwired your brain for this breakdown. And finally, you will learn the precise neuroplasticity protocol to use your shadow to resurrect your nervous system. Before we pull apart the heavy mask you have been wearing for 40 years, ask yourself one terrifying question. When the door finally locks, who is actually breathing inside your body? Let us wind the clock back a few hours before the collapse to exactly 4:55 p.m. The office is quietly emptying out, and Marcus is finally reaching for his coat. But then, a shadow falls over his desk. A colleague casually asks if he can just review one more massive presentation before tomorrow morning. I want you to pay very close attention to what happens inside his physical body in this exact millisecond. His stomach instantly twists into a violent, sickening knot. His chest constricts tightly, as if the oxygen has been suddenly vacuumed out of the room. A hot flush of resentment spikes up the back of his neck, and his body is screaming a visceral, desperate no. But watch his face. In a fraction of a second, his facial muscles contort into a warm, rigid smile. Before his conscious mind can even process the betrayal, his own voice bypasses his free will and says, "Sure, no problem at all. I can absolutely handle it." You might look at this and call it being a team player. You might tell yourself you're just being the good, reliable guy who keeps the peace. But clinical neuroscience tells a much darker, much more violent story. What you're witnessing here is not kindness. It is a sophisticated trauma response. It is a profound biological phenomenon known as fawning. When that colleague asked for a simple favor, Marcus's amygdala, the primal threat detector in the brain, did not register a mere inconvenience. It registered a lethal threat to his social survival. In evolutionary terms, being rejected or disappointing the tribe meant exile, starvation, and death. Today, your brain is still running on that ancient primitive hardware in a modern corporate office to keep you safe from the perceived danger of abandonment or conflict. Your autonomic nervous system violently overrides your physical limits. It hijacks your vocal cords to appease the threat. But maintaining this flawless persona, this heavy armor of the man who never complains and has everything under control, is an act of extreme cognitive labor. Every single time Marcus forces a smile when he actually wants to scream. Every time he rehearses a conversation in the shower to sound perfectly polite. His prefrontal cortex is burning through massive, unsustainable amounts of glucose. This is called masking. And it is a biological tax that bankrupts your energy reserves. He is literally starving his brain of metabolic energy just to keep the fake persona glued to his face. By the time he finally drives home and pulls into his garage, his social battery is not just dead, it is utterly shattered. He leaves the engine running. He sits in the dark isolation of his car for 20 long minutes, staring blankly at the steering wheel, deeply dreading the moment he has to walk through that front door and instantly put on the perfect husband and father mask. He genuinely believes his crushing exhaustion is just the result of a heavy workload. He thinks he just needs to manage his time better. But he is entirely wrong. Because the real tyrant draining his life force isn't his boss, his workload, or his family, and what happens when the sun goes down will prove it. When the sun finally goes down and the house falls dead silent, the illusion of control completely shatters. It is now 3 a.m., and Marcus is lying rigidly in the dark. He has a critical board meeting in exactly 5 hours, and his rational brain is desperately begging him to close his eyes. But he cannot stop. His thumb is mechanically swiping through a glowing screen, consuming a relentless stream of meaningless videos, adding useless items to a digital cart he will never buy. He feels like a paralyzed passenger trapped inside his own physical body. You have probably experienced this exact midnight paralysis, silently shaming yourself for having zero self-control or terrible time management. But clinical psychology and the work of Carl Jung reveal a much more profound, deeply unsettling truth about what is actually happening in your bed. This is not insomnia, and it is definitely not laziness. What you are experiencing is a hostile biological takeover, a phenomenon often called revenge bedtime procrastination. Throughout the entire day, your conscious mind, the heavy mask of the perfect provider, has held your body hostage, aggressively stripping away your autonomy to keep everyone else happy. But at 3 a.m., when your prefrontal cortex is too utterly exhausted to enforce the rules, your repressed unconscious mind violently kicks the door open. Carl Jung called this repressed entity the shadow. Your shadow does not care about your mortgage, your boss, or your immaculate reputation. It has been suffocating all day, and now it is demanding a ransom of cheap, immediate dopamine just to feel alive. It is a desperate rebellion against the prison you built. And the aftermath of this midnight rebellion is always devastating. The next morning, running on pure adrenaline and toxic cortisol, Marcus drags himself into the kitchen. His son accidentally drops a plastic toy on the hardwood floor, a harmless, everyday mistake. But Marcus suddenly explodes. A terrifying, disproportionate wave of raw rage erupts from his chest, leaving his family stunned and his own heart pounding with instant, crushing guilt. He immediately projects his internal agony onto the most vulnerable people in his life. And what is his instinctual response to this humiliating failure? He brutally punishes himself. He downloads another habit-tracking app, sets his alarm for 4:30 a.m., and swears to exercise more discipline. He genuinely believes that if he just pushes harder, he can finally conquer the monster inside him. But this is the ultimate fatal illusion of modern hustle culture. Applying ironclad discipline to a severely traumatized, hyper-vigilant nervous system is not self-improvement. It is a highly sophisticated form of psychological self-abuse. You cannot use a whip to heal a bleeding wound. The harder you try to forcefully cage your shadow, the more violently it will dismantle your life. And very soon, Marcus will face a moment where the mask does not just slip, it completely shatters. But the human body can only sustain a relentless biological war against itself for so long before the master circuit breaker is violently pulled. Fast forward a few weeks to a seemingly ordinary Tuesday evening, Marcus has just survived another grueling day of extreme masking, another exhausting day of aggressively swallowing his boundaries to keep the peace. He walks through the front door, serves dinner to his family with a rigid, practiced smile, and finally retreats to the quiet isolation of his bedroom. He sits down heavily on the edge of the mattress, and then something deeply terrifying happens. He completely freezes. He is still wearing his restrictive work clothes. He stares blankly at a meaningless spot on the bedroom floor for 20 excruciating minutes. His conscious brain is screaming at his hands to just reach down and untie his leather shoelaces, but his arms feel like they are made of solid lead. He literally cannot move a single muscle. You have likely been in this exact agonizing spot, judging yourself ruthlessly, calling yourself lazy, unmotivated, or clinically depressed. But I need you to listen to me very carefully right now. This edge of the bed paralysis is not a failure of your willpower or your morality. It is a highly successful, non-negotiable biological intervention. Your autonomic nervous system has realized that your conscious mind, your desperate need to be the perfect, accommodating guy, is essentially driving your physical body toward a fatal system failure. So, your body forcefully pulls the emergency brake. It induces a profound state of dissociation, a dorsal vagal shutdown, effectively paralyzing you to prevent you from spending one more drop of metabolic energy on other people. To understand why your nervous system has to resort to such extreme, violent measures just to protect you, we have to perform a clinical autopsy on the very foundation of your persona. We have to travel back to the exact moment you unconsciously signed the psychological contract that is currently killing you. Look closely at Marcus's history. He grew up in a house where the adults were always stressed, volatile, or emotionally unavailable. At 7 years old, Marcus unconsciously realized that having personal needs made him a dangerous burden. So he adapted. He became the invisible peacekeeper, the easy child who never asked for anything and always smiled. Whenever he suppressed his own anger or sadness, he was rewarded with a pat on the head and praised for being so incredibly mature in that defining developmental moment. His young brain fused two concepts together permanently. He learned that love and safety are completely conditional on his absolute self-erasure. That 7-year-old boy forged a brilliant, necessary survival mask to navigate a terrifying emotional war zone. But here is the brutal, heartbreaking truth you have been desperately avoiding. That terrified 7-year-old boy is still driving the vehicle of your life. He is the invisible tyrant holding a heavy whip, mercilessly beating a 45-year-old man's exhausted body, forcing it to carry the weight of the entire world just to avoid the perceived threat of abandonment. You have spent decades blaming your boss, your spouse, or your heavy workload for your crushing burnout. But the real abuser, the one who strictly refuses to let you rest, is the traumatized inner child living inside your own nervous system. And as Marcus sits paralyzed on the edge of his bed, he realizes the heavy mask is finally shattering into pieces. But how do you stop a biological program that has been running your life for 40 years? When you realize your entire adult life has been secretly directed by a terrified 7-year-old. A profound, heavy despair usually sets in. You might look in the mirror at 45 and think, it is simply too late. You might tell yourself that your brain is permanently hardwired to please others, that being the sacrificial lamb is just your unchangeable, tragic personality. But this is where the cold, hard science of neuroplasticity delivers a massive, life-altering cognitive slap. Your brain is not poured in concrete, it is living, breathing plastic. Every single time you violently override your body's exhausted limits to say yes, you're digging that invisible trauma trench a little deeper. But the absolute inverse is also true. Every single time you finally allow yourself to disappoint someone, you're physically carving a brand new neural pathway. This brings us to the ultimate psychological surgery. To cure this terminal burnout, we must apply the fusion protocol of Carl Jung's individuation and modern neuroscience. Right now, you're treating your midnight shadow, the anger, the bitter resentment, the desperate scrolling, like a vile demon that needs to be completely exorcised with more toxic discipline. But Jung explicitly warned us that your shadow actually holds 80% of your dormant life force, the pure energy you're desperately seeking. The vibrant vitality you think you lost in your 20s is not permanently gone. It is just locked in the dark basement of your unconscious, right alongside your capacity to set fierce, unapologetic boundaries. Healing does not mean taking an expensive week off in Hawaii to rest your mask. It means letting the mask completely burn to ash. It means willingly engaging in the necessary, deeply painful ego death of the good guy. For Marcus, the breakthrough happens the very next time that exact colleague casually approaches his desk at 4:55 p.m. Instead of rapidly swallowing the violent knot in his stomach, he actually tracks the somatic sensation. He consciously listens to it. He taps into that repressed midnight rage. Not to yell, but to forge a psychological boundary of solid steel. He lets the agonizingly awkward silence stretch. He watches the sharp disappointment flash across the other person's face, and he absolutely does not rush to fix it. He simply says, "No, I cannot take that on." In that terrifying, gut-wrenching microsecond, his ancient amygdala screams that he is going to die, but he does not die. He walks out to his car, and for the first time in a decade, he does not sit paralyzed in the dark. He feels a strange, terrifying rush of clean oxygen filling his lungs. This is what we call sacred rage, the biological permission to be the absolute villain in someone else's story, so you can finally be the living hero in your own nervous system. But stepping out of this familiar gilded cage creates an incredibly dangerous psychological vacuum, and what fills it next will determine everything. The vacuum left behind when your perfect mask finally burns to ash is terrifying, but it is also the most sacred space you will ever enter. For 40 years, you have been desperately running from the collapse, treating your exhaustion like a shameful disease that needed to be cured with more toxic productivity. But the collapse was never the enemy. The collapse was a profound biological rescue mission. It was the necessary, beautiful death of a fake persona that was slowly suffocating your actual soul. I want you to take a deep breath right now and give yourself the ultimate amnesty. You have the absolute, non-negotiable right to be a disappointment to others if it means being loyal to your own nervous system. You are officially allowed to be the villain in their story, so you can finally stop betraying yourself. Becoming a sacred traitor to the crushing expectations of the world is the only way to resurrect the exhausted 7-year-old child living inside your chest. True healing never begins by violently fixing your external circumstances. It begins by gently sitting on the edge of your bed in the quiet dark, placing a hand over your pounding heart and whispering, "I'm done performing. I'm done starving my own life force to keep you comfortable." But as this heavy, suffocating armor falls to the floor, a chilling new reality will begin to emerge in the cold light of day. When you finally stop fawning and start setting fierce boundaries, you will look at your inner circle and realize something deeply disturbing. Many of the people closest to you never actually loved you. They only loved the compliant, exhausted mask you wore. They loved what they could extract from you. Which leads us to a terrifying question. Why does your specific nervous system constantly attract and fiercely protect these emotional vampires? In our next session, we are going to dissect the 5 unconscious lies that keep you permanently trapped in a magnetic cycle of narcissistic abuse, and how the ghosts of your childhood are secretly picking your romantic partners. If something inside you finally shifted today, if you're ready to let the mask burn, leave a comment below saying, "I choose my own survival." Your shadow has been waiting decades to hear those words.